Support for Disrupted comes from the Connecticut Office of Film, Television, and Digital Media.
From Connecticut Public Radio, this is Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. Every January, the United States honors the life and legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But the federal holiday doesn't just honor Dr. King. It also is a designated National Day of Service to encourage people to volunteer and improve their communities. But those communities' needs don't end when the day of service ends. Here in Connecticut, people like Erik Clemons work year-round to improve the communities they care about. Erik is CEO of the New Haven-based nonprofit Connecticut Center for Arts and Technology, also known as CONCAT. The organization offers job training and youth programs. He's also the founding CEO of Connecticut Community Outreach Revitalization Program, or CONCORP. It's the for-profit subsidiary of CONCAT dedicated to economic development in New Haven. Erik recently wrote about the organization's plans to redevelop part of New Haven's Dixwell neighborhood. It appears in an opinion piece for Connecticut Insider. In the piece, Erik grounds those plans in a strong commitment to community. He compares the redevelopment to making a quilt. He writes the following: by weaving together the stories, experiences, and perspectives of those who live in Dixwell, we aim to create a space that reflects their lived experience, resilience, and unique identity, something far more meaningful than any single piece. This hour, we talk about community, hope, and love with Erik Clemons. Erik, welcome back to Disrupted.
Hey, good morning, Dr. Kalila Brown-Dean. It's so good to see you and to be back.
It's great to have you back. And it's been 4 years since you were on the show talking about your work as a nonprofit leader, your vision for the New Haven area. And we thought it was good to have you back because this is an episode that's really reflecting on the legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his vision for community and community empowerment. Before we talk about the work that you're doing, what would you say has been the impact or the imprint of Dr. King's legacy on you?
I think the most profound thing that I think of when I reflect on Dr. King, which I do a lot, just given the work that I've been doing for the past 15 years, is his ability to show up knowing that in the end, the very thing that he is trying to manifest, he will not see.
Talk to me about how that is part of the work you do, that not just the showing up, but the understanding that you are planting seeds in a vision that will outlast you. How does that show up for you?
Yeah, so my intentionality is always to play the long game, quite frankly. I have this issue, quite frankly, with poverty, and a persisting and pervasive poverty that has really ravaged Black communities across the country, of course, but especially here in New Haven. And I know that I will never solve the issue of poverty. I believe that the issue of poverty will not be solved because there are people who can solve it who do not want to. Yet, I still come to work. I still think deeply about the things that I can do to address that long languishing issue. I still demonstrate, hopefully, a deep sense of hope and love as it relates to the issue of people in poverty, or the issues of people in poverty, and quite frankly, in my relationship with those who are not in poverty. That at some point, hopefully in their lives, that they will reflect and think deeply about their own kind of self-discovery around the issues that I know that they can address, but maybe aren't willing to do so. And so every day, I show up for work. I show up in community. I speak with people and people speak with me. trying to figure out how to solve issues that I know that issue will not be solved in my lifetime.
Why do you show up to do that work? It sounds complicated.
Yeah.
It sounds frustrating. It sounds like when there's a problem right in front of you and others either don't see the problem or choose not to look at the problem, it would be easier to do that work somewhere else. What is it about this work that isn't work but a calling for you to continue showing up?
That is the case. It is a calling. The work chose me. I did not choose it. And the relationships that I have garnered that have impacted my life, like my relationship with you, are relationships that I had not counted on or thought about having. Never in my wildest dreams did I think I would be doing this work at the level that I'm doing this work, and quite frankly, at the scale that I've been blessed to be able to do this work with incredible people who do this work with me. It's not just me. And so it is almost a force of gravity that brings me to the place where I know that I may take a loss today, but you still got to show up. And what most importantly about showing up for me, it is not me showing up, it's people seeing me coming back, because that's where trust happens. And if there's trust, then there's change. And so that's really it. It really chose me. Kalila, the things that I've been so blessed to be able to do, and the things that I've been able to discover about myself while doing them, are really just part of the calling, right?
You are often very candid and honest about the cost of showing up. And I think that's important as we talk about the legacy of Dr. King, because now people romanticize this vision of King that everyone supported him, everyone loved him, that when he would walk into a room, the crowd would part. When the reality is King was seen as a troublemaker. People didn't want him to do the work because then they worried about what it would mean for them. And even as you have this calling, you have talked about showing up in spaces where people question, why are you here? Why are you the one to do this? Or attacking you because of past disappointments they've had with others. How important is it for us to go past that sort of polished veneer of what it means to lead and really address the consequences for people stepping into or being called into leadership?
I think what happens is when one represents hope, they represent disappointment also to other people. And if you think about going back to Dr. King, if you listen to his 1967 speech at Riverside Church, where he's talking about the Vietnam War, but also talking about poverty and talking about people's responsibility, one, to the war and to be against the war, two, to help poor people. He sounds very different. He almost sounds a little bit like Malcolm. Mm-hmm. And when you listen to that speech, in the midst of him being in the midst of that speech, he is despised. Like 80% of the people who supported him have now turned their back on him. And not only turned their back, but they are actually talking bad about him while turning their back on him. And I think, of course, not at the scale of Dr. King. I would never compare myself to him or anyone like him. But there is some of that I've experienced in community. And again, as I said, a lot of times if I am coming and representing hope, in my opinion, that hope also brings about disappointment because people have been disappointed. Mm. And those folks who have been hopeful may not be as hopeful anymore because somebody or some institutions or some organizations have done something to them as opposed to doing something for them. And so I did not bargain for feeling some of the pain and disappointment that I have experienced in the past, I would say 7 or 8 years. But, I got over it. And again, I talk a lot about this tension between self-preservation and self-discovery. One can easily say, you know what, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going to preserve my identity and I'll go do something that may be a bit easier and a bit more lucrative, quite frankly. I'll be very frank about that. But I lean on always the idea of self-discovery. What is it about me as I reflect on the work that I do and if thereby reflecting on myself? What is it about me that I need to do better, be better? What kind of spirit am I bringing to the public square that allows people, even though they are feeling dejected, disappointed, and let down, that they see a glimmer of light? And maybe in myself or my colleagues, or maybe something that I may have said that sparked that seed of hope again. And so those are the moments that compel me to come back. I don't come back for myself because I'm stubborn. I come back because I believe that the life that I've been able to live and the experiences that I've able to have and the relationships that I have that have pushed me and compelled me and held me accountable, that everyone is entitled to that. Everyone. And not everyone has gotten that. Because people, I believe, who could solve poverty, they want to help people who are poor, but they don't want to be in proximity to their issues. They don't want to be in relationship to the issues. They want to be in relationship to the person who is helping them.
You've mentioned the word relationship a number of times. Relationships are difficult, especially in a context where people are bringing very different intentions, but also when sometimes people want to help so that other people know that they're helping. And that kind of relationship to ego can be a challenge. One of the things that others see in your leadership, and I certainly see in your leadership, is that you are always thinking about the next generations of leaders and how you bring people into community so that they can lead wherever they are. When we look at the staffing of the organizations that you run, the community partners that you're working with, it is often helping people get into position that they may not have seen for themselves. What is that call to leadership to say, I may be the person right now, but I want us to be leaderful so that we have choices and options and people have choices and options?
Great question. A lot of times, and I think, I'm a believer, and so God has allowed me to see, most often to see what a person could be versus what they are in the moment. And I believe in large part, the reason I've been able to do what I've been able to do and at the scale I've been able to do it is that somebody saw that in me or people saw that in me. And so, it was so interesting. The question is great because, we had a staff meeting at Concord and, when it was my turn to share and speak, I led with that idea that we have to be even more intentional about developing the leadership skills and also lifting the spirits of those who are behind us in terms of age and even in terms of station in life. Like what we have to be really working hard to develop and be in partnership and relationship with these next two generations behind us. Because God forbid they have to deal with what I've dealt with, right? If they have to deal with what I've dealt with, then I have failed. We should be plowing snow for them. My job is not just to lead, but also make a way for those who are coming up. The very thrust of my being is really about that. No different than I do for my 4 daughters or my 3 grandchildren. We have to create a world for them where they don't have to meet or even expect the challenges that we have faced. And you know it as well. When you talk about your daughter, right? It's the same thing. And if we are not doing that, then we have failed not only these people, these young people behind us, but those who are before us who have carved a way for us to be in this position to carve a way for the next generations. Yeah. We have failed. And a lot of times, in my opinion, selfishness gets in the way. And quite frankly, I think a lot of times people don't want to help other people because they don't want to be exposed for not knowing what those other people think they know. So proximity is a very scary thing sometimes because when you're close to somebody, you can see their warts or you can, it kind of demystifies the myth in the legend that one has created in their mind for people, or even, what social media has created in the minds of people who think about people who really may not be the person you think they are. And so close proximity allows you to see those things. And I think people shy away from that a lot.
Coming up, more with New Haven nonprofit leader Erik Clemons. He'll share an important piece of advice that's always stuck with him.
And it's one of the most profound moments in my life. And I realized that I had not really been intentional about being in relationship with the people that I say I wanted to be with and help.
This is Disrupted. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. This hour, we're hearing about one nonprofit leader's experiences promoting change in his community. Erik Clemons is founding CEO of the New Haven nonprofit ConCat and its subsidiary, ConCorp. I asked Erik to tell me a little bit more about the organizations.
I'll talk about ConCat first because that was the first organization built in 2011. Took a year to build, and then I staffed up. It is a replication of Bill Strickland's Manchester Bidwell model in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I think Bill Strickland today still is the preeminent social entrepreneur in this country has ever seen, in my opinion. And so, New Haven decided to replicate Bill Strickland's model, where he looked at market-relevant job training in a geography and connected those job training efforts to actual jobs in whatever industry chosen. And then looked at arts as a vehicle for academic achievement. So we have replicated that here in New Haven. And, thanks to, some really anchor and enduring institutions here in New Haven, Community Foundation for Greater New Haven, and I know you know that because you were there and chaired that board at some point, as well as Yale New Haven Hospital. And Morna Borgstrom at the time, who was the CEO of Yale New Haven Health, as well as Kevin Myatt, who was the head of HR for all the hospitals in the hospital system. Those three individuals, as well as Carlton Highsmith, who became the board chair of ConCat and ConCorp, and who galvanized a group of people, and that became the founding board of directors for ConCat first. And so then I came along and started really putting meat to the bone and building the organization. And took a year to build. We created job training programs based on Yale New Haven Hospital's needs. So there's a pipeline from a training at ConCat to a job in phlebotomy or medical billing at first. And then Dr. Brown-Dean, I started really thinking about what we haven't done well. And quite frankly, what I haven't done well. And one thing that I knew I didn't do well was the issue of reentry, that folks coming home from incarceration by the hundreds, coming back to New Haven with no skills, no jobs, no place to live, no resources. What could we do for that critical mass of people who were in dire need of help, but also deserved a second chance? And so started building a culinary school. And for whatever reason, just given the feasibility that we did, culinary was more forgiving to people who had been incarcerated. So we built this culinary school, and 40% of the people who would be participants in that culinary academy would be people who had been incarcerated at some point in the time of their life. That, quite frankly, in my opinion, really put ConCat on the map nationally, because we built this incredible commercial kitchen that is unrivaled, quite frankly, in New Haven, and trained folks, hired chef instructors from New Haven, trained folks, and some folks who had been incarcerated. We were working with parole and probation, and those folks are now still gainfully employed. Some, I think we're about 7 or 8 years in now. While doing that, ran a really great arts after-school program where I wanted the kids to study, the young people in New Haven especially, to study the Harlem Renaissance. And I wanted them to study the Harlem Renaissance. One, I wanted them to understand the history of Black folks coming off the heels of slavery. moving and migrating throughout the country, but mostly coming north. And a critical mass of black people settled in this place called Harlem, New York, and they built their own community. And they built the community based on the arts, based on some industry, based on rhetoric, the idea of church and preaching in the black church. And I wanted these young black kids to be steeped in that incredible history of Harlem. And so for 5 or 6 years, our kids studied the Harlem Renaissance and really created art and performances based on their studies throughout the summer. After that, we moved into Motown, where we were on a time continuum. So we, from the Harlem Renaissance, we moved into the 50s and 60s, and the kids studied Detroit and community building in Detroit through the advent of the arts. And so the kids studied greatly in that era and did performances and wrote and did art projects on Motown and Detroit and community building. And they are now, they then did, they celebrated the 50 years of hip hop. I think it was last year or 2 years ago. And now we're moving into, they're going to be studying now Parliament Funkadelic P-Funk this summer. And I'm so excited and proud about that because, as you know, that was a very artful time in terms of music and being creative and for black people especially. And this is really all about these young people being in relationship with their people that they would have never imagined existed had it not been for the efforts of CONCAT, and especially the youth arts program. And so CONCAT is going well. We actually created another training called Bio Launch, where, I was seeing that there's a proliferation of the biotech and bioscience and biopharma happening right here, downtown New Haven especially. And a good friend of mine, Craig Cruz, who is a bioscientist and professor at Yale, who has a huge heart for folks who are marginalized. And Craig and I got together and he said, Eric, I want to do something that will deepen and widen the black middle class through the advent of science. And so we got together and created this incredible training program in the biosciences and biopharma called Bio Launch. And it's really more about Craig on the, especially on the science side. And so that has taken off and it's become, quite frankly, a national model. Let me back up. Now, while, CONCAT was doing well, started thinking also about what is our next iteration of impact. We've trained hundreds of adults, especially in phlebotomy and culinary arts, medical billing. How can we create place and space for them to live out their potential, to facilitate their dreams, especially in these black communities that have languished in poverty? That these people now, because they are gainfully employed, they are seeing the world very differently and walking in the world very differently. And how could we scale that deep sense of hope and achievement and accomplishment? And so we myself and Carlton Highsmith, who's the board chair of CONCAT, and Paul McCraven, who's a founding board member at CONCAT, who had just retired from KeyBank. And we got together and we put together the mechanics for this thing called ConCorp. Now, let me back up. The idea came from someone at the Community Foundation named Leon Bailey, who's a good friend of mine, who had years ago, in a very prophetic way, sent me these documents and said, it's things at ConCorp, and it had some verticals. He said, this is the next phase. This was years ago. And I kept it. I kept it in my drawer, in my office. And I had showed it to Carlton and I think some other people. But I kept it, and sometimes I would look at it and really study it. Didn't know how to operationalize what he was talking about. But I did know instinctively that this was going to be good. And so took it back out, took that paper out, really studied it myself, Carlton, Paul, and we started putting together ConCorp. And ConCorp would be the economic development, economic justice driver that would aggressively address poverty, especially in Newhallville and Dixwell, two Black historic neighborhoods that have not been invested in decades. And so that's the work we endeavored to do. And we, Dr. Browndean, we really looked at purchasing one building, and we would use that one building to try and affect change in Dixwell and Newhallville. But we realized that the need was so great that we weren't thinking deep or wide enough about the impact that we could make. And so it's very happy to say to you now that Concord, when it started out, it was maybe 4 or 5 employees, and we had this one building that we purchased, and we were going to affect change through that one building and program. Concord now has purchased an entire block on Dixwell Avenue from Webster Street to Charles Street, which was formerly the Dixwell Plaza and the Elks Hall. We have purchased a 45,000 square foot elementary school that we've converted into a Black business incubator that houses also a cafe called Recess Cafe and also an art gallery that I'm very proud of and excited about. We have a entrepreneurship academy with Quinnipiac School of Business. Myself and Mr. Highsmith are trustees of Quinnipiac University, as you know. And so they have been working with us, and that has been absolutely successful. We're in our 3rd cohort of Black business owners who are in this academy. We have 5 food business lines, and are about to take over the food services at the Wallingford Country Club. So we are now going outside of New Haven. And, it's just, again, it started out with thinking about what could our next iteration of impact be? And this thinking about the iteration of impact was inspired by the success of Concat first. And I think that story gets lost a lot, that Concat is the progenitor of the impact that has happened through Concat and Concord. But I'm saying all this not to be pretentious, but to show how when one is committed to one's vision and the universe conspires to help you, how much can happen. And it's not about the fullness of the suites of offerings that we provide New Haven. To me, it's more about the number of people that we're able to help now.
Yeah. I want to push back a little bit because you said, I'm not sharing this to be pretentious, which you are not. But I also think you have to tell the story. And if the people who are living it and creating and doing the hard work of being questioned and challenged and, challenged in a way that says, are you actually capable of doing this work? Or this group of people, are they the people who are qualified to do that work? If you don't tell that story, then there are others who are engaging in social entrepreneurship and economic justice that the minute they get confronted with the wall, they stop because it is mind-blowing that this is the resistance. And so I think getting the story out about, yes, this was about vision and inspiration, but at the core of it is community. You have been very intentional. This project could have been done in a shorter time frame. You were very intentional about saying, this is a vision we have, but what's the community's vision? And bringing people together in spaces where sometimes they did not want to come together and made it clear about that, but also being intentional about community voice and purpose being essential. There's a lot of economic development that happens across Connecticut. There's very little economic justice. And for this to be a project of justice and community, you wanted that voice. You recently wrote a piece for the Connecticut Insider where you talk about this community development and building, and you use the metaphor of a quilt. Share that metaphor with our listeners.
Yeah, thank you for one. I was wondering when the pushback was coming from you. So
You know me.
But thank you for the pushback and always lifting that up, Dr. Browndean. I mean that. Early on when thinking about what we would do on Dixwell Avenue, we had hired an architecture firm. And the lead architect was a guy named Peter Cook, who was one of the architects on the Smithsonian African American Museum. Just an incredible, incredible brother who lives in Bethesda, Maryland. And our initial meeting with him and his team, he came, and we talked about the attributes that we would love to see in this design of Concat Place on Dixwell, which is a 8-acre design place and space that we are underway now of building. And Peter showed us these quilts, and he talked about these quilts and how they're very different, but the how they come together and the different textures and so forth and so on. And this had to be maybe 7 years ago. And I never forgot that. It stuck with me. I don't know why it was such an indelible print on my mind and my heart. And I think it's, in some part, it has something to do with how he was and how he presented it. And so I had always thought about that. And as we got underway and really was doing this really community-centered design approach to impact and addressing poverty and justice, and we're not only listening to the voices of community, but leaning on the voices of community, no matter if they gave praise to what we were doing or absolutely told us they hated what we were doing and didn't want us in their community. And, there was two sides to that. And some of that was very wonderful, and we got sometimes unjust praise, and sometimes we got unjust scorn as well. But I go back to the idea that we opened up with, that no matter what you say, I'll be back tomorrow, and I want to have the same conversation with you. And as I thought about the quilt, I thought not so much about the pieces of the quilt, but about what stitched the pieces together. Because that, to me, is where the power is, right? The idea of stitching together different pieces of different shapes, textures, colors, to me was a metaphor for humanity. And what stitched us together is our common sense of hope, right? And our want to be in kinship with one another, but maybe a little too scared, and maybe not even a lack of sense of humility, and that does not allow for people to authentically come together and be together. So the question was, how can we have this common sense of hope, and through that create a common sense of love through a kinship, an authentic kinship, not just relationship. Like, you're my sister, and we need to behave in a way that we are family. And so I see the quilt as that, like how do we thread these different pieces together, and what is the thread made of? And so I was inspired to write a piece about this work, and what inspired me not only was Peter Cook's presentation, but the many people who I have met because of the work that we are doing, who have had really great things to say because they heard about me or read about me, or have had some not so great things to say because they feel like they need to hold me accountable and they want to be in relationship with me in a way that they have some authority over what I'm saying and doing, which I'm fine with. I wasn't at the beginning. And in community, you have to, this, you have to take it all. Yeah. You have to take it all. And because in some of the painful moments were some of the best moments of my life that changed my life. And I talked about, Miss Ella Smith, who is 85 years old. And I'm presenting at this meeting, and I have these beautiful design boards, and I'm talking about what I think because you were the chair of the community foundation at the time. And Kalila was going nowhere. I mean, absolutely nowhere. And as you can imagine, presenting to a people who are just, you can feel.
Yes.
They don't have to say anything. I'm just looking at them. And I knew as I'm presenting, I'm talking about all these things that I care about. They would have none of it. And so Miss Ella pulled me to the side one day and she told me, you need to present yourself before you present this project. And it's one of the most profound moments in my life. And I realized that I had not really been intentional about being in relationship with the people that I say I wanted to be with and help. And even worse, Dr. Brown-Dean, I grew up very poor. I grew up in poverty. That's why I'm so struck by the issues of poverty and the symptoms of especially the psychic pain created by poverty. And while talking to the people, I was talking to them about me helping them while at the same time signaling to them that I'm not poor anymore. Just in case you were wondering, right? Like I want to help people who are in poverty, but I want you to know I'm not poor.
I'm distant. Yeah.
I'm not poor anymore, but I'm helping. And I didn't realize that I was doing it until I really reflected on the way I was showing up with people, right? That's kind of what poverty will do to you. It will make you forget sometimes, and it's, I think sometimes people mistake the idea of privilege making you forget. No. Privilege won't make you forget that you were poor. Being poor will make you forget that you were poor when you're not poor anymore. And so, I had to readjust my mind and I had to rest my heart, and I would come back to the people with a deeper sense of humility. And I sometimes pride myself on being a good listener. I think I am a good listener. But I needed to listen even more. Because there were things that weren't being said that were being said at the same time. And I wasn't paying attention to that because I was paying attention to more of getting the favor of people who were giving me scornful looks. And so, it has worked out. There may be still a very smaller pocket of resistance to the work that we are doing in community. But those were some of the very valuable lessons that I've learned, not only about community, but about my life and myself. And, as it relates to, this idea of quilting as a metaphor for community, that all people can help. And that all people, mostly all people want to help. They just don't know how. And they may be a bit scared to help. And so they've been helping through me and through the relationships that we have.
Coming up, more with New Haven nonprofit leader Erik Clemons. He'll talk about the impact that he hopes to make on his community.
My prayer is that my life has inspired something or somebody to do even more than what I was able to do.
This is Disrupted. Stay with us. Welcome back to Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. This hour, we're preparing for Martin Luther King Jr. Day by talking about building and encouraging community. Erik Clemons is founding CEO of the New Haven nonprofit ConCat and its subsidiary, ConCorp. Here's more of my conversation with Erik. Let's call a thing a thing. We as a country, as a global community, as a state community, whatever boundary you want to impose, we'll be facing some very challenging days, moments, occasions, experiences throughout this year. There are a lot of people who are concerned and who want to do something, but they don't know what to do, or they don't feel that they have the same kind of calling that you mentioned, but they know things are not okay and they want to do something. You talk a lot about hope, but you also talk about love. In these days, in these challenges, what do you say to people about that power of love to move us through, but to also help us figure out what we can do individually and collectively to move forward? What do you say?
Yeah, I think I think people want change. It goes back to what we talked about earlier, but they're not willing to go through what it takes. They're not willing to pay the cost for the change that they want. And a lot of that has to do with a deep and wide love ethic. That it's hard to love when it's very difficult to love when you are in an atmosphere of deep hate. And not only just a spirit of hate, but also verbally. And, one has to ask oneself, what are you willing to go through? What is the cost you're willing to take on to exact the justice you say you want to exact, to express and demonstrate the love that you want, right? You got to be willing to demonstrate love, the very love that you want to ingest as well. And I think darkness happens because there's just an absence of light. And I think the people of light, they need to show up. They need to show up because what ends up happening is that the hope that the work that you are performing, that you've created, right? You create a deep sense of hope in people just by virtue of you showing up in spaces and places and speaking the idea of spirit, the idea of love, the idea of hope, perseverance, all these things that I know you talk about a lot. Right? The work that you have done will be wasted if other folks don't join you. The work that I've been so blessed to be able to do will be wasted if people who have been so impacted by the work don't show up now, because this is the time to show up. Right? And there's a different type of fight. One doesn't have to fight physically, you know this. But the very thing that you say you want to do for humankind, then do that thing. Do that thing. The very thing that you hope to see in the world, create that. And if you can't create it, show somebody else how to do so, or inspire somebody to dream, or facilitate the dreams of other people. It doesn't, everyone doesn't have to do the things that I've been able to do, or the things that I can't do what you do. Right? But I can inspire people to go see you. I can inspire people to read your book. I can inspire people to listen to your show. That's where change happens.
I just want to say, I got to take a moment. I'm thinking about, Erik, sometimes I feel like we make things more difficult than they need to be. We can talk ourselves out of progress. We can talk ourselves out of light because we don't think that we are entitled to that lightness. And not just lightness in terms of illumination, but lightness in terms of the lightness of the soul, of the spirit, the ability to drop your shoulders and just breathe deeply and take a moment to see beauty every day. That, for me, is the real legacy of Dr. King. When you see those pictures of him laughing with his children or sharing this light moment and look with his wife, that is not the leader and the image. That is the person. Yeah. And I think for you, what you remind us of is that, yes, we have to do these big, difficult things. But if we don't take the time to appreciate that everyday beauty and to inspire that in other people and to name it in other people, then we never get to the real big thing.
You're so right. You're so right. Again, I've been very blessed to do some really, I think, amazing things that I never thought I would be doing. And I've garnered a level of success but success has been the result. It was never the reason. And so the small things in life, the details of life, are the most important things to me, to your point. And taking a walk with Bill Graustein and talking about the world and how we see the world, right? That's it for me. Or laughing with my grandchildren, or watching my daughters laugh, or it is those small things. It's not the big buildings that we're building or the businesses that we're running. I've done well in life because I chose to help people. And that is the fundamental tenet of our faith, is that if you have the ability to help, then you help somebody who's in need. And because of that, I've been blessed with so much more than I ever thought I would be. Not because I deserve it, or I'm smarter than anybody, or I have the right relationships. No, but because I chose to help people who I knew needed help. That's it. It's that simple, to your point. It is that simple. But sometimes helping people is very complex.
Helping people is indeed complex. My very last question.
Okay.
You meet a lot of people in different situations, different walks of life. What is it that you hope people say about Erik Clemons?
That's a great question. I don't want people to say anything. What I want is them to maybe read about or hear about some things that I've been blessed to be able to do, and they do even better. I don't really think about that, nor do I really care too much about that. I think we need enduring institutions, right, versus enduring reflections. And those institutions should be of service to the needs of the people, because there will always be needs of the people. And my prayer, I mean this, my prayer is that my life has inspired something or somebody to do even more than what I was able to do without even having to talk about me.
That's how you build legacy.
Yeah.
Erik Clemons is the founding CEO of the Connecticut Center for Arts and Technology. He's also founding CEO of Connecticut Community Outreach Revitalization Program, or Concord. Thank you, Erik.
Thank you, Dr. Kalila Brown-Dean.
Disrupted is produced by Kevin Chang Barnum, Robin Doyon-Aiken, Meg Fitzgerald, and Meg Dalton. Disrupted has more than 200 episodes highlighting changes and change makers. And with all those disruptions, you may not know where to start. So we made you a playlist to give new listeners a sense of what this show is all about. You can find the playlist at ctpublic.org/disrupted. And you can listen to all the previous episodes of Disrupted by finding us wherever you get your podcast. And you can listen to new episodes every Friday at 9 a.m. From Connecticut Public Radio, this is Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. Thanks for listening.